Gate B14 at JFK was loud and restless, the way airport terminals get on a Tuesday morning. The rolling thud of suitcases, the flat crackle of overhead announcements, coffee cups balanced on armrests, strangers pressed knee to knee in a sea of plastic chairs. The October sun came in flat through the terminal windows, and every seat in the boarding area was taken. Near the far end of the gate, a man was crouched down on the floor beside a small boy. Jamal Thompson had his voice low, the kind of low that doesn't carry, not for the crowd, just for his son. Eli was 7 years old and hadn't said a word in 10 minutes, which was how Jamal knew the fear had gotten all the way in. The boy was gripping a stuffed bear against his chest, both arms wrapped around it like a life vest. "Hey," Jamal said. "Eli, look at me." The boy's chin was trembling. His eyes were enormous. "See that plane out there? The big one? Blue stripe on the tail?" Eli looked at the window. Barely a nod. "That one's ours. And you know what's on it?" A pause. "What?" "Peanuts. Those little foil packages. And you know I always give you mine." It wasn't much. But Eli exhaled. His shoulders dropped half an inch, and the bear got squeezed a little tighter. Jamal reached up and straightened the strap on the boy's backpack, then pulled a small gift bag from his carry-on. Blue and gold tissue paper, rustling as he set it upright on the seat beside them. Eli's birthday was in 3 days. The plan was Miami, a hotel with a pool, cake from that Cuban bakery his son had been asking about since last summer. 3 days off, the first real break Jamal had taken in almost 2 years. He'd bought the gift in the shop near baggage claim 40 minutes ago, while Eli was eating a pretzel and studying the departures board with the concentration of a small person taking the whole thing very seriously. The overhead PA announced final boarding for another gate. A child somewhere behind them was laughing. A woman nearby was watching Jamal and Eli with the soft expression people get when they see something they recognize as good. That was when Derek Mills walked over. He came from the right side of the gate, uniform pressed, badge catching the terminal light. He was 32 and carried himself with the ease of someone who had never had much reason to doubt his own read of a room. He had been watching Jamal for several minutes, not watching the way a person watches a crowd, but watching the way someone watches a target. Shoulders squared, thumbs near his belt. His eyes moved over Jamal with slow, unhurried certainty. Jamal felt him coming before he heard anything. "Hey, you! On your feet!" Jamal turned his head. He looked at the officer, then looked at his son. "I'm sorry?" "I said stand up." The nearest conversation stopped. A woman in a yellow cardigan put down her phone. 2 college-age kids across the aisle looked up from their laptops. Jamal rose slowly, keeping himself angled between Derek and the boy. "Officer, I'm waiting for our flight. Gate B14, Miami. It boards in about—" "Hands where I can see them." "My hands are right here. Sir, I have my boarding pass. I have ID. I can show you." Derek stepped forward and took Jamal's arm. It wasn't a request, wasn't a warning. It was a grip, a twist, a pull, and then the handcuffs clicked shut in a single practiced motion. The sound was sharp. A woman near the window actually gasped. 2 teenagers had their phones up within seconds. "Detained," Derek said. "Suspicious behavior, loitering in a restricted boarding area." "Dad!" Eli's voice cracked open. Not the soft, manageable kind of crying. The full, unraveling panic of a 7-year-old watching his father being taken away by a stranger in a uniform in the middle of an airport full of people. Derek glanced down at the boy. "That what you want your son to see? You think about that?" Jamal's jaw tightened. "Please don't talk to my son." "Maybe you should have thought about your son before." "I am his father. I am standing in a public terminal with a boarding pass and a gift bag, and I am not doing anything wrong. If you'll let me reach for my—" "You can explain it at the station." Derek started walking, and Jamal had to walk with him or be dragged. As Jamal was jerked sideways, his carry-on caught the seat armrest and toppled. The gift bag fell to the floor and hit the tile hard, sending the blue and gold tissue paper fanning out across the walkway. The bear Eli had been holding slipped from the boy's arms a half-second later, landing face down near the window wall. Derek walked through both without breaking stride. His right boot came down on the bear, flattening it against the floor. His left came down squarely on the fallen gift bag, crushing the box inside with a dull creak. He didn't look down once. Eli screamed. Jamal reached toward his jacket. Just for his phone. Just to call a colleague or anyone who could come stay with Eli until this got straightened out. And Derek took the phone before Jamal's fingers touched it. Slid it into his own pocket like it was nothing. An airport employee, a young woman with a lanyard and wide, helpless eyes, rushed over and knelt beside Eli. "Sweetheart, it's okay. It's okay. I'm going to take you somewhere safe while—" "I want my dad," Eli said. "I want my dad!" The PA overhead. "Final boarding call for Flight 1147 to Miami. All passengers, please proceed to gate B14. The crowd had not thinned. It had doubled. 40, maybe 50 people standing with their phones raised. At least 3 were live streaming. A man near the windows narrated quietly. "I'm telling you, this is wrong. This is just wrong." A woman was already on her phone, voice clipped, sharp. "No, I'm watching it right now." Jamal Thompson walked through gate B14 in handcuffs and said nothing more. His posture was straight. His face was still. He didn't shout, didn't resist, didn't explain himself to the crowd filming him from both sides. He walked straight, shoulders back, not fast, not slow. The controlled pace of a man who had made this choice before and already knew how it ended. But just before the corridor door closed behind him, he turned his head. Slowly, deliberately. He looked directly at the camera held by the closest person, a young woman in a blazer, close enough that her face was visible on her own screen. His eyes didn't ask the crowd for anything. They didn't ask for anything at all. The interrogation room at the 47th Precinct was the same room they always were. Drop ceiling, fluorescent light with a flicker in the third tube, a table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs. A mirror that everyone knew was a window. Jamal sat with his wrists on the table, handcuffs still on, and he stared at the door and let his mind go somewhere else. It went to 14 months ago. A Tuesday then, too. He'd been at his desk on the 4th floor of the FBI's New York field office at 26 Federal Plaza, in the middle of a conference call about a wire fraud case, when his personal phone lit up with a number he'd been waiting on for 11 days. He'd excused himself into the hallway and answered it. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. When it was over, he stood at the window looking down at Broadway for a while before going back in. His marriage had been over for 3 years by then. The divorce was official for 2. Shared custody had settled into a rhythm that worked on paper, but required a kind of constant negotiation that exhausted him in ways the job never did. Eli was with him every other week and every other weekend, and Jamal had learned to read his son's moods the way he'd learned to read case files, patiently, without forcing a conclusion, letting the picture form. He had been good at both things for a long time. Jamal Carter Thompson had joined the FBI at 26, after 3 years as a Maryland state trooper and a law degree from Howard University that he'd finished in the evenings while working patrol. His file, by any measure, was exceptional. 14 years in the Bureau, 3 major organized crime convictions, a stint with the Financial Crimes Unit that broke a laundering network running through 7 cities, 2 commendations from the Director's Office, a sealed case from 2019 that he was still not permitted to discuss in any room that wasn't secure. He had also been stopped and questioned 5 times in his career while not in uniform or clearly identified as an agent. Twice in parking garages, once outside a restaurant in D.C., once near a federal building in Atlanta, which had a particular irony he had never found funny. and once on a train platform in Queens, on his way home from a 12-hour shift, where an officer had looked at his badge for a long moment before handing it back without comment. He knew what it cost him to hold himself still in those moments. He just never said it out loud. His therapist, a tall, thoughtful woman named Dr. Samuels, who worked out of an office in Midtown, had told him once that the discipline it takes to remain composed in a moment of injustice is a kind of grief work. That keeping the anger locked down was not the same as not feeling it. He had filed that away, thought about it on runs, brought it out again on nights when Eli was with his mother and the apartment was quiet. He had thought more than once about walking away, not from the bureau specifically, but from the whole architecture of it. The compromise, the watching yourself, the calculation that happens automatically now when he walks into a room and reads who's in it and adjusts accordingly. He had never told his supervisors that. He had told Eli's mother once, early in their marriage, and she'd said, "But who else is going to do it? Who else is going to be in that room?" And he hadn't had an answer then, and he still didn't. And that was why he was still there. He had thought about it enough times that it no longer surprised him. It just sat there, quiet and heavy, the way an old injury does. The sealed case from 2019 had led to something else, a thread that pulled loose and kept pulling. By early this year, the New York field office had assembled a small task force under director-level authorization. Not the kind of investigation that gets announced at press conferences, but the kind that needs a long runway and clean hands. The 47th precinct in Queens had come up in the data twice. Complaint records that had been filed and then mishandled, a pattern in use of force reports, two names that appeared with troubling consistency. Jamal had volunteered for the embedded phase. Technically, he was on leave. He had done this before, taken leave to run a quiet operation that wouldn't survive open association with the Bureau. It was not fun work. It was slow, precise, and mostly invisible. The point was to be unremarkable, to move through the city as a private citizen and document what a private citizen experienced. He had not expected to be arrested at JFK this morning. He had been genuinely, simply taking his son to Miami for the boy's birthday. But when the cruiser turned off Northern Boulevard and he saw the sign through the window, 47th Precinct, he had let out a very quiet breath. He looked now at the clock on the wall. 10:22 a.m. The door opened. Derek Mills walked in and dropped a manila folder on the table like he was dealing cards. "Let's start from the beginning," Derek said, and pulled out the chair across from Jamal and sat down with the comfortable slouch of someone who had never been on that side of the table. Jamal looked at the clock again. 10:23. He had time. Derek started with the basics. Name, address, employment. The standard cadence of a low-stakes interrogation. Voice neutral, pen moving across his notepad. Jamal answered each question once, completely, without embellishment. His name, his address in Brooklyn, his employment status, federal government, currently on approved leave. Federal government, Derek repeated, and the way he said it made clear he didn't believe it. "That's correct." "Doing what?" "Administrative work. I'm not able to be specific about my division." Derek smiled, not warmly. "Right. Of course you can't." He tapped the pen against his pad. "So you work for the federal government, you live in Brooklyn, and you were at JFK this morning because my son and I had a flight to Miami. His birthday is Thursday." "Uh-huh. And what were you doing on the floor at gate B14 for?" He consulted his notepad. "Approximately 14 minutes. He's afraid of flying. I was talking him through it." 14 minutes. On the floor. He's 7. Derek looked up. "You got a boarding pass?" "In my jacket pocket. The inside one." Derek stood, took Jamal's jacket from the hook on the wall, and began going through the pockets, slowly, making no effort to hurry, the way someone does when they want the other person to feel every second of it. He found the boarding pass. He set it on the table without looking at it. He kept going through the pockets. He found Jamal's wallet, license, 2 credit cards, a library card from the Brooklyn Public Library with a small smear of finger paint on the edge, Eli's work from last month. He found a set of keys. He held them up. These. My apartment. And this one? He held up a small flat key on a separate ring. Black rubber grip, no label. Jamal said nothing. What does this open? I'd rather not say in this setting. Derek's expression shifted. His eyes sharpened. You'd rather not say. He set the keys down carefully and went back to the jacket. In the inner breast pocket, he found a folded note card. Not a business card, but a plain note card with a string of numbers written in ink. 8 digits, a hyphen, 4 more. He unfolded it and held it up. What's this? A reference number. For what? For a file. Whose file? I'd prefer to have legal counsel present before we get into that. Derek put the note card on the table beside the key. Then he reached back into the jacket and found what was in the interior zippered pocket. The thing that made him pause for a half-second before pulling it out. It was a photograph. Old, the edges worn slightly soft. Jamal was in it, younger by several years, in a suit, standing beside another man whose face had been redacted, not digitally, but carefully, with a strip of matte black tape applied to the print itself. The body language between the two men was easy, the kind of posture between people who knew each other well. Derek looked at the photo for a long moment. Then he looked at Jamal. Who is this? Someone I worked with. Why's the face covered? Because some identifications are protected. Derek set the photo down and leaned back in his chair. A thin smile moved across his face. He crossed his arms. You know what I think? I think you printed this photo yourself. Cut a strip of tape and stuck it on. You think that makes you look connected? Somebody's going to look at this and think you're somebody important. He shook his head slowly. I've seen this before. Guys carry props, make themselves seem like they got something going on. Jamal did not look away. He did not respond. In a break room 2 floors up, a young officer named Tran was eating a sandwich and watching his phone. He'd pulled up the video 30 minutes ago. It had already been shared 4,000 times, and the number was climbing. He watched the clip twice, then a third time. The man in handcuffs wasn't scared. That was the thing. Tran had seen a lot of people in holding, and not one of them had sat like that. He pocketed his phone and went back downstairs. At that same moment, on a commuter rail platform in Midtown Manhattan, Lisa Grant was standing with her phone in both hands, watching the clip she had posted 2 hours earlier. She'd been right there, close enough to see the man's face when the cuffs went on, close enough to see the little boy reach for the bear that had fallen. She had posted it because it felt wrong, and she didn't know what else to do. It now had 42,000 views. Her notifications were going off in waves. She swiped through the comments, and most of them were not the kind she had expected. Not outrage, or not only outrage. There were hundreds of comments laughing at Jamal, calling him names, speculating about what he must have done to deserve it, arguing that any reasonable person would have complied faster, using language she had to scroll past quickly. One comment had over 3,000 likes. Bet he was up to something. Cops don't just walk up to people for no reason. Another read, crying about getting handcuffed when you brought your kid to the airport looking suspicious. LOL. A thread of replies beneath it stretched down the screen. She stopped reading. Then she read one that stopped her cold for a different reason entirely. Watch 147. Watch his hands. She went back to 147. Watched. The man was being walked toward the gate corridor, wrists cuffed behind him, and he turned his head toward the camera, and his hands behind his back were doing something. A small gesture, 3 fingers, a fold and release. Not a wave, not a random movement, something deliberate. She watched it 3 more times. Then she took a screenshot and texted it to her brother. Back at the 47th precinct, Derek Mills had finished logging Jamal's belongings. He dropped the plastic evidence bag on the desk outside the interrogation room and told the intake clerk to flag the file. Then he walked back down the hall, stopped in the doorway, and looked at Jamal one more time. "You're going to be here a while," Derek said. "Might as well get comfortable." Jamal looked at the wall clock. 11:09 a.m. He said nothing. He looked at the clock the way someone checks a timer when they know exactly how long is left. They moved him to a holding cell at 11:30. It was a standard temporary hold. Concrete bench, drain in the floor, the ambient smell of institutional cleaning solution over something older and worse. 2 other men were in the cell when Jamal was brought in. One was asleep on the far bench with his jacket over his face. The other was a large man in a gray hoodie who sat up when Jamal entered and looked him over the way you size up a room before you decide whether it's worth your time. Jamal sat on the bench near the door and said nothing. The man in the gray hoodie held the silence for 30 seconds, then stood up. He was broad across the shoulders, moved in a way that announced itself. He came and stood about 3 feet from Jamal. "You look lost," he said. Jamal looked up at him. "Just sitting here." "Just sitting here," the man repeated, like it was funny. He took another step forward. Jamal didn't stand. He didn't shift his weight, or put his hands up, or change his expression in any way. The man wanted a reaction. Jamal wasn't going to give him one. He just held the man's gaze with the flat, patient attention of someone who had already read the room and had zero interest in what came next if the other person pushed it. The man stared at him for another long moment, then turned and walked back to his bench and sat down. A few minutes later, he was looking at the wall. Through the narrow window set into the cell door, Officer Tran was watching. He'd come down to the holding floor on the pretense of running a document to the intake desk, but he'd taken the long way around and stopped in the viewing corridor. He watched Jamal sit still on that bench with a stillness you don't often see in a holding cell. And the thing that had been bothering him since he watched the video sharpened into something he couldn't ignore. The man didn't look scared, didn't look defeated, didn't look angry. He looked like he was working. Tran didn't say anything to anyone. Derek was upstairs, and Derek would shut it down before Tran got 3 words in, the same way Derek had been shutting things down since Tran was assigned to the precinct 8 months ago. Tran had learned quickly that Derek Mills was not a person you contradicted in front of other officers. He had filed that away alongside several other things he hadn't yet figured out what to do with. At 11:55, a duty officer entered the interrogation room and set a tablet on the table. He didn't say much. He left it playing and stepped out. The screen showed the arrest video itself, not a news segment, not a news anchor discussing it, but the raw clip from Gate B14, exactly as Lisa Grant had posted it, now running on a news site that had embedded her footage directly. The view count in the corner of the player read 290,000. Below the video, a comment section was visible. The duty officer had not bothered to scroll it down. Jamal read some of the comments. They were not kind. Dude probably had warrants. Imagine doing this in front of your own kid. Embarrassing. Cop did the right thing. This guy looks sketchy. One comment with over 5,000 likes read, "Airport security is everyone's job. Stop playing the race card every time." The reply thread beneath it ran for hundreds of entries. Jamal read them without expression. He pushed the tablet to the side and looked at the table. The officer who'd brought it in left without a word. The door didn't close fully behind him. Jamal's sister Denise called the precinct at 12:10. She had seen the news. Her voice, when the duty officer picked up, was controlled in the way voices get when a person is holding themselves together by will alone. She'd been crying. That much was audible, even beneath the forced steadiness. She had seen her brother in handcuffs on the local midday broadcast, had seen the clip playing on her office computer, had watched the comments pile up below it. She asked if her brother was being held, was told she'd need to speak with the intake supervisor, was transferred, was put on hold, was transferred again, and eventually left a callback number that was never called back. In the hallway, Jamal could hear the television from the break room 2 doors down. He could hear someone reading comments aloud in the half-amused way people do when they've decided a situation is entertainment. He could hear his own name, said in a flat, generic way. The way names get said when someone has been reduced to a news story. He looked at the clock on the wall. 12:58 p.m. He pressed his hands flat on the table and breathed. He was not afraid. But something else was there, quieter and more personal than anger, heavier than embarrassment. It was the image of Eli reaching for the bear. That was the thing he couldn't set down. Not the handcuffs, not his name on a news ticker. That. 7 years old and already carrying it. He looked at the clock. He breathed. He waited. Lisa Grant's brother, Darius, was 41 years old and had spent 12 years in Army intelligence before a back injury took him out of service in 2018. He'd spent those 12 years learning to recognize what communication looked like when it wasn't supposed to look like communication. He could have taught a course on it. When Lisa texted him the screenshot at 11:20 a.m., he was in his apartment in the Bronx eating breakfast. He looked at the screenshot. He looked at it again. He put down his fork. He texted back, "Call me." She called. He didn't bother with a long preamble. That gesture he's making with his hands, 3 fingers extended, fold, release. You know where that comes from? No. It's a contact signal. You use it when you're in a situation where you can't speak freely, but you need to communicate your status to someone who might be watching. You're saying, "I'm okay. I know you're there. Wait for the signal." Lisa was quiet. "Where was the camera when he did this?" Darius asked. "He looked right at it, like he knew I was filming." He knew. That gesture wasn't for you. It was for anyone on his team who might see the video. "His team," Lisa said slowly. "You mean?" "I don't know what I mean yet," Darius said. "But that man has some kind of training. Military, federal, something. He was not scared in those handcuffs. You don't move like that when you're scared." Lisa was already back on her phone's video, scrolling to 1:47, watching the hands. She posted a new video at 12:30 p.m. Not the arrest footage, just herself, on camera, speaking directly to her phone, explaining what her brother had told her. She spoke plainly, without theatrics, and she said specifically, "I don't know who this man is, but I think there's more to this than what we're seeing. The way he looked at my camera, he wanted someone to see that." The new video got 50,000 views in 90 minutes. The comment sections across both videos tilted. The theory thread started, some credible, some not, and buried in the middle of a long thread on the second video, someone had posted, "Does anyone else notice the watch? He keeps checking it. Not nervous, not bored. Like he's monitoring something." At the precinct, 2 things happened in close succession. The first, at 1:10 p.m., the duty officer at the intake desk received a standard request from the holding area. The detainee in Interrogation 2, Jamal Thompson, was asking to make a phone call. This was routine. The officer logged it, walked back, and handed Jamal the desk phone through the half-open door. 1 call, 2 minutes. Jamal dialed a number he had memorized years ago. It rang once. Marcus Hale picked up. "It's me," Jamal said. 47th, B14. "I'm waiting." 3 seconds of silence on the other end. Then a single click as the call ended. Jamal handed the phone back. He sat down. He looked at his watch. 1:12 p.m. The second thing happened 5 minutes later. Derek Mills came back into the interrogation room, and his mood had shifted. He was still controlled, but there was something tighter in him now, a slightly higher energy underneath the surface. He'd been on his phone during the lunch break. He'd seen the second video, the one with Lisa explaining the hand gesture. He'd seen the watch theory spreading in the comments. He didn't like the direction things were going, which was something he had not anticipated needing to manage this morning when he'd walked up to a man crouched on the floor at B14. He sat down across from Jamal. "I want to give you an opportunity here," he said, and the shift in register was noticeable. Less flat, slightly conciliatory, trying on a different tone. "If there's something you want to clarify about your employment, your reasons for being at the airport." "I've already told you my reasons," Jamal said. "And the items in your jacket. I've already addressed those. The key, the note card." Jamal looked at him. "I'd like a lawyer." Derek leaned back. The conciliatory tone dropped. "You're not under formal arrest. You're being detained." "I understand the distinction. I'd still like a lawyer." A call had come into the precinct's main line at 1:17 p.m. Not the tip line, not dispatch, the main administrative number. And the duty officer who picked it up listened for 45 seconds before putting the call on hold and walking directly to Captain Elena Reyes's office without knocking. Reyes was a compact, contained woman of 45 who had been running this precinct for 6 years and had seen enough to have developed a sharp internal alarm for when a situation was about to become a much bigger situation. She had already been watching the social media coverage since mid-morning with a growing unease she hadn't yet acted on. She was in the middle of drafting a response memo when the duty officer came in. He told her who was on the phone. She picked up the call herself. She listened. She did not say much. At one point, she asked a single clarifying question, and when the answer came, she set her pen down very carefully on her desk and said, "I understand. We'll address this immediately." She hung up. She sat for a moment with her hands flat on the desk. Then she told the duty officer, "Get me Derek Mills." Down in the interrogation room, Jamal was alone again. The clock on the wall read 1:24 p.m. He looked at the face of his watch, the same watch he had been checking all day, steady and unhurried. And for the first time since this morning, he allowed himself one small, private breath of relief. 4 words had been enough. He knew what was outside by now. He'd heard the sound, 3 minutes ago, of heavy vehicles pulling to a stop in front of the precinct's main entrance. The particular sound of SUV doors opening and closing in sequence. He looked at the clock. 1:25. He sat back and waited. The lobby of the 47th precinct had the usual mid-afternoon quiet. A few officers at the front desk, a man in the waiting area filling out a form, the soft radio from the dispatch room, the smell of burnt coffee. The duty officer at the front desk was reading something on his computer screen when the door opened. 2 black SUVs had parked outside, bumper to bumper, blocking the street. A third was angled across the driveway. The men who came through the door wore suits that had been put on with purpose that morning. They entered in a tight formation, and the room felt smaller immediately. Marcus Hale was in front. He was 38, broad-shouldered, with close-cut hair and the unhurried manner of someone whose authority doesn't require volume. Behind him were 2 FBI agents, badges visible, and a woman in a charcoal blazer who worked for Internal Affairs and had been quietly building a file for 11 months. She had a leather portfolio under one arm and an expression that said she had been waiting for a day like this one. Marcus stopped at the front desk. "Marcus Hale, Federal Bureau of Investigation, New York Field Office." He produced his credentials and held them in front of the desk officer. "We're here regarding the detained individual Jamal Thompson. You'll want to get your captain." The desk officer had already reached for his phone. Elena Reyes came down from her office within 90 seconds. She had her badge on and her jacket buttoned. Her expression was closed in the way it gets when she has already decided what happens next. She met Marcus in the lobby, and they spoke briefly, voices low, and then she straightened and said, "Follow me." Derek Mills was summoned over the intercom. Not a request. His number, 2 short tones, the code that meant Captain's Office, now. He was at his desk reviewing overtime forms when it came through. He took his time. He didn't think much of it. He figured it was about the social media coverage, figured he'd explain his reasoning, figured it would be handled. He walked into the main floor and stopped. The lobby was not normally used for anything except arrivals and paperwork, but the 4 people who'd come in with Marcus Hale had positioned themselves at the center of the floor, in plain view of the bullpen where a dozen officers now stood without moving. Nobody reached for a phone. Nobody said anything. Outside, the situation was different. Word had moved through the neighborhood fast. The black SUVs, the plates, the suits going in. On the sidewalk in front of the precinct, a crowd of 30 or 40 people had gathered, and at least 6 of them had phones up and live, their screens showing the same thing. The front entrance of the 47th precinct, the SUVs, the officers visible through the lobby glass. The streams were pulling in viewers in real time. Someone had already pushed the word out on the second video's comment thread. "Something is happening at the 47th right now." Marcus Hale looked at Derek Mills when he came through the door. He did not look away. "Officer Mills?" Marcus's voice carried across the floor clearly, without being raised. "My name is Marcus Hale. I'm a special agent with the FBI. I'm going to ask you to come with me, and then I'm going to ask you to do something." Derek looked from Marcus to Reyes to the woman from Internal Affairs. Something shifted in his expression. Not fear yet, but the first crack in the certainty that had carried him through all 12 hours of this day. "What's this about?" he said. "Jamal Thompson," Marcus said. "The man from this morning." "Jamal Thompson," Marcus said again, the name delivered with a deliberateness that made several people in the room exchange glances, "is a special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He holds a GS-14 classification, has been with the Bureau for 14 years, and has 2 commendations from the Office of the Director." He paused. "He has also been embedded in a federal investigation, authorized by the Director's Office, that has been documenting patterns of civil rights violations and abuse of authority within this precinct for the past 8 months. The room went absolutely still. Somewhere near the back of the bullpen, someone put down a coffee cup. The desk officer at the front had stopped typing. Outside, visible through the lobby glass, the phones were still up, still live. Every word Marcus Hale said was being heard by thousands of people who had spent the day watching this story move. Marcus continued. "Agent Thompson was at JFK International Airport this morning on personal leave, accompanied by his 7-year-old son. He was detained without legal basis by Officer Mills and transported to this precinct, which, given the nature of the ongoing investigation, may constitute obstruction of a federal inquiry in addition to civil rights violations under federal statute." Derek's jaw had tightened. He looked at Reyes. Reyes looked back at him and said nothing. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus said. "We're going to go to the holding area. You're going to remove the restraints from Agent Thompson yourself. Then you're going to step back." "I don't think," Derek started. "That's not a negotiation," Marcus said. "It's what's happening." The walk from the lobby to the holding floor took 3 minutes, and every officer in the precinct who could see it watched. Word had already reached the bullpen, the break room, the desk officers upstairs. People drifted to windows and doorways. Outside, through the precinct's glass front, the crowd on the sidewalk had grown. The live streams were still running. The interrogation room door opened. Jamal Thompson stood up from his chair. He looked at Marcus first, one long look that was its own entire conversation, and then he looked at the room around him. Reyes, the Internal Affairs officer, the agents in the hallway, and Derek Mills standing in the doorway with the handcuff key in his hand. Derek looked at Jamal for a moment that seemed to stretch longer than it was. He had every piece of it in front of him since 9 this morning. He just hadn't been looking at the right shape. "Open them," Marcus said. Derek stepped forward. The handcuff key went in. The left cuff released, then the right. Jamal rolled his wrists slowly, deliberately. He did not look at Derek. He looked past him, through the open door, into the hallway where a dozen people were watching. He picked up his jacket from the chair. He picked up the gift bag from the table. Someone had retrieved it from the terminal floor, the blue and gold tissue paper crumpled, the box inside crushed flat. He looked at it for a half-second, then carried it with him. He walked out of the room. In the hallway, an officer he'd never seen before, young, Tran on his nameplate, was standing to the side. When Jamal passed, Tran gave him a small, single nod. Jamal met his eyes and nodded back. Outside the precinct, the news cameras and the live phones caught Jamal Thompson walking through the main door under his own power, jacket on, the damaged gift bag held at his side. He didn't stop for cameras. He didn't say anything to the crowd on the sidewalk. He walked to Marcus Hale's SUV and got in. The door closed. Inside the precinct, Captain Elena Reyes turned to Derek Mills. "My office," she said. "Now." Derek Mills was suspended with pay pending investigation by the end of that afternoon. Suspended with pay pending investigation, which sounded administrative and calm, and was neither. He surrendered his badge and his service weapon to Captain Reyes at 3:45 p.m. He walked out of the precinct through a side exit, into a parking lot where no one was waiting, and sat in his car for a long time before driving away. The suspension was not the end. It was the first piece. Internal Affairs had opened a formal inquiry by 5 p.m. The federal civil rights investigation that Jamal had been embedded in, the one that had brought him quietly into the orbit of the 47th Precinct over 8 months, now had a public face, and that changed things. Cases that move in the shadows tend to stay in the shadows. Cases that become visible tend to accelerate. The documentation was already substantial. Use of force complaints that had been filed and then rerouted away from formal review. Inconsistencies in stop and frisk reporting. A pattern in which certain officers' complaints were consistently resolved in the officer's favor, regardless of evidence. 3 witnesses who had given statements to a federal investigator. And now, on top of all of it, the video, which had been viewed 2.3 million times by the end of the first day, which had a segment at 1:47 that a retired Army intelligence officer had publicly analyzed on his own social media account, and which had been entered into the federal evidentiary file that same afternoon. On the sidewalk outside the precinct, the crowd that had gathered to watch the SUVs arrive was still there when Jamal walked out. Most of them had their phones up, and most of them had spent the past 2 hours watching the live streams that had broadcast Marcus Hale's announcement in the lobby in real time. The same people who had commented that morning, the ones who had written, "Bet he was up to something," and "Cops don't just walk up to people for no reason," were now reading the same feeds they had been reading all day, and the feeds had changed. The comment threads that had mocked Jamal in the morning were being flooded with corrections. People who had shared the arrest clip to laugh at it were deleting their posts. A woman who had been in the airport that morning and had posted a clip of her own, taken from a different angle, captioned "suspicious behavior for," deleted it within 20 minutes of the FBI announcement and locked her account. The crowd on the sidewalk outside the precinct was quiet in the specific way people get quiet when they realize they had been certain about something that turned out to be entirely wrong. It was not a comfortable silence. Lisa Grant gave a recorded statement to the federal investigators on Thursday. She sat in a conference room at 26 Federal Plaza and described what she had seen at Gate B14 with the precise, undramatic clarity of someone telling a story she intends to get right. She described the gift bag on the floor, the tissue paper, the bear under Derek's foot. She described the moment Jamal had looked into her camera. She answered every question she was asked, and several that went beyond what was strictly necessary, because she had decided that morning that if her footage was going to matter, she was going to make sure it mattered correctly. The investigators thanked her. One of them told her, without saying more than was appropriate to say, that her video had been more useful than she knew. Officer Tran filed a report of his own, internal through the IA channel, on Friday. He described what he had observed in the holding area, the way Jamal had de-escalated a potential confrontation without it looking like de-escalation, the way he'd monitored the clock with an exactness that had bothered Tran from the moment he'd seen it. Tran wrote carefully and precisely. When he was done, he submitted the report and sat at his desk for a while afterward. His lunch had gone cold. He didn't care. He ate it anyway. He had not been able to speak up for Derek's victims before. He was speaking up now. Captain Elena Reyes cooperated fully with the federal investigation. She had been cooperating, in fact, for longer than the public record would indicate. She had filed those complaint patterns 18 months ago and watched them go nowhere. She had kept filing. That was all she could do, and she had kept doing it until it finally mattered. She gave 3 separate interviews to investigators over the following 2 weeks. She answered every question. She did not soften anything. By the second week, 6 officers at the 47th were under formal review. 3 additional complaints, previously shelved, had been reopened. A use of force review board had been convened at the departmental level, which was not a standard response to a single complaint, but was the kind of thing that happens when a federal investigation demonstrates systemic pattern. The city's police oversight commissioner gave a statement that was careful and institutional in tone, but that contained, buried in the 3rd paragraph, the phrase, "independent accountability structures," which anyone who had been watching the department for more than a year read as a signal of something more structural to come. Jamal returned to work 2 weeks after the arrest. His supervisor met him at the door of the New York field office and shook his hand. Neither of them mentioned what had happened. Jamal went to his desk. Marcus Hale took him to lunch on his first day back. They went to a diner in Lower Manhattan, where the booths were high-backed and the coffee was served in thick mugs, and no one bothered you. They talked about the case, about the investigation's next phase, about what the Federal Review Board was likely to recommend. They talked about Marcus's daughter, who had just turned 3 and was apparently conducting a campaign to rename the family dog. They talked about the birthday trip, which had finally happened, delayed by 10 days, but it had happened. "He okay?" Marcus asked. "Yeah," Jamal said. "He's okay." "You okay?" Jamal looked at his coffee for a moment. "Working on it." Marcus nodded. He didn't push. That was one of the things about Marcus. He'd known Jamal for 9 years, long enough to know when a question had already been asked and answered in a way that couldn't be rushed. They split the check and walked out into the October afternoon, which was cold now and bright, the city doing its city thing around them, noise and motion and 10 million people going about their business. "3 cases on deck when you're ready," Marcus said. "Give me the files Monday," Jamal said. He went home. He sat on his couch and looked at the report he'd been drafting since the beginning of the embedded period, the one that now had a different opening than it would have had 6 weeks ago. He made notes in the margin. He changed a sentence. He set it down. He looked at the photograph on his shelf. Him and Eli from the Miami trip, standing in front of the ocean with the boy's arm thrown around his father's waist, both of them squinting into the sun, grinning in the unself-conscious way of a father and a son in a good moment. He kept it there. 3 weeks after the arrest at Gate B14, Jamal Thompson and his son stood in the same terminal at JFK. Saturday morning, clear and cold. Eli wore the same backpack the same slightly lopsided way, one strap lower than the other. He was holding Captain, a new one, same color and size, mailed to him by someone at the FBI field office with a card that read, "A replacement for the one that got stepped on." He looked brave. Eli named this one Captain too, without hesitation, as if the name had always belonged to the bear. In his other hand, he held his boarding pass flat between two fingers, exactly the way Jamal had shown him. They got to Gate B 14:35 minutes early. Eli looked at the sign, then at his father. "This is the same gate." "Yeah." "Was that on purpose?" "Yeah." The boy sat with that for a moment. Over the past 3 weeks, he'd asked a lot of questions. Jamal had answered each one honestly, that people sometimes make wrong assumptions before knowing a single true thing about someone, that staying calm can be harder and more important than fighting back, that what happened that morning was part of something bigger than one bad day at an airport. Eli looked out at the tarmac where a plane was being loaded, the ground crew in orange vests moving in their steady way. Then, "Do you hate the police now?" "No." "Even the one who did it?" Jamal chose his words carefully. "Justice doesn't come from anger. Anger's heavy. It slows you down. Justice comes from truth, from showing it, telling it, not looking away from it, and from people with enough courage to act on what they see." Eli was quiet. "Like the lady with the video?" "Like the lady with the video. And your friend Marcus." "And my friend Marcus." The boy leaned into his father's arm. "And you?" Jamal pulled him close and said nothing. The PA announced boarding in 15 minutes. A little girl in a green coat was spinning slow circles in the middle of the walkway, while her father watched with the resigned expression of a man who had stopped intervening. Jamal reached into his carry-on and produced a gift bag. New blue and gold tissue paper, bright and uncreased. He had kept a torn piece of the original from the terminal floor in a drawer at home. It had felt like the wrong thing to throw away. Open it now or wait until Miami? Eli considered this with genuine gravity. Miami. At the hotel. By the pool. Good call. 3 months later, the Department of Justice released a preliminary report on civil rights compliance at the 47th Precinct. 38 pages. Specific structural requirements for complaint processing, mandatory body camera review, and independent oversight mechanisms, among the most substantive accountability measures the precinct had faced in 2 decades. Officer Tran was promoted to detective the following spring. He kept a copy of the report in his desk drawer and read the recommendations section every few months. Not because he had to, because he wanted to remember what it looked like when something actually changed. Lisa Grant heard about the report from her brother. She didn't know the full scope of what her video had set in motion, the federal case, the investigation, the reforms. She only knew she had pointed a camera at something that felt wrong and pressed post. That it had mattered. That was enough. On Jamal's first morning back after Miami, there was a card on his desk. No signature, just Marcus Hale's handwriting. 3 cases. Monday. And yes, I'm buying lunch. Jamal folded it, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and got to work. Outside the window, the city went on, loud, imperfect, and full of people making the daily decision to do their jobs with care. Most of them would never be filmed. Most would never be tested the way Jamal had been tested at Gate B14. They would just show up, pay attention, and refuse to look away. That was how things got better. Not all at once, not without cost. One honest act at a time. A report filed, a camera pointed at something wrong, a phone answered on the second ring. Small, specific, and real.